Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh resigns. An historic moment. Is the PA on the verge of collapse, or can it be reconstructed? Join us. My dear friend and colleague, Khaled Abu-Toameh, co-host of Al-Shaq Al-Satlana, Our Middle East, and it truly is our Middle East. All of us, Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze, Alawis, you name it. We have so many minorities across the Middle East that claim this region as home, and now a very dramatic development inside the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, resignation of Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, very well known as a professional, as a technical professional, but also somebody that was expressed tremendous animus towards his neighbor Israel.
Yes, first of all, Dan, I disagree with those who think that this is a dramatic development. I mean, it was expected. They've been talking about replacing Mohammed Shtayyeh, the prime minister, for a number of months now, actually for the past year or so, I would say. The question is, in what context is his resignation seen? Is it part of a plan to reform the Palestinian Authority, to revitalize it, as the Americans keep saying? Or is it just, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas once again playing musical chairs, moving one person from one place, from one job to another, and replacing him with the same person? Mohammed Shtayyeh, he is a professional, yes, and he is a former head of a very important investment fund or economic fund called the Palestine
Investment Fund. Yeah. Is it? I think it's PIF, Palestinian Investment Fund.
Yeah, something like that. But he is also a very senior Fatah official, an official of the ruling Fatah party, headed by Mahmoud Abbas. And there has been a lot of criticism directed against Mohammed Shtayyeh, especially during the COVID years, that his government was not doing enough to help the Palestinians. It had not provided them with enough vaccines. It did not compensate Palestinians who lost a lot of their income during that period. Now, I think the timing over here is important because the resignation of Mohammed Shtayyeh is being seen as part of an effort by the Palestinian Authority to revitalize, as the Americans say. Now, I personally think that this is not more than cosmetic changes, because if you want to revitalize the Palestinian Authority, the problem is not the prime minister and the problem is not the government. The problem is the whole system.
The culture. There's a culture of corruption in the Palestinian Authority that you and I have been discussing for 3 decades.
Yeah, I mean, what's the use of replacing Mohammed Shtayyeh with Mohammed Mustafa, the former deputy prime minister and the Ministry of the Economy? I mean, what's the difference between them? And how is the new government going to be different than previous governments? This is not the first technocratic government, by the way. Shtayyeh was heading a government mostly made of the technocrats. It was also a political government, but most of the members are technocrats, independent technocrats. In the past, Rami Hamdallah, the former prime minister, until 2019, he was an academic. He was a president of Al-Najah University in Nablus, and he also headed a technocratic government. I mean, we have to remember that already in 2003, Mahmoud Abbas himself was appointed as prime minister of a Palestinian technocratic government as part of a U.S. administration's plan to curtail the authorities and the powers of President Yasser Arafat back then. So they forced Yasser Arafat to appoint Mahmoud Abbas as prime minister of a technocratic independent government, which still had some political figures in it. It didn't work because Yasser Arafat was breathing down the neck of the Palestinian government. Yasser Arafat made everything to foil the work of the government. In the end, Mahmoud Abbas resigned. Later, we had Salam Fayad, who was imposed on Mahmoud Abbas by the Americans and the Europeans, who again wanted reform and change. So we had Salam Fayad also heading a technocratic government, a government of professionals, by the way. And he was the first prime minister who was not politically affiliated. He was an independent figure.
I mean, he wasn't part of Fatah.
He wasn't part of Fatah, wasn't part of Hamas, but he wasn't part of any political faction. But what happened to Salam Fayad? Who hindered the work of Salam Fayad? Who obstructed him? Who put obstacles in his way? The same Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, now. Because Mahmoud Abbas is very aware of the game or of the plan that the Americans and the Europeans are putting, which is to try and marginalize him, to try to transfer the authorities of the president to the government. And that's something President Abbas, at the age of 88, is not going to allow. Now, we see the same, history repeats itself. And it just shows that the Americans don't learn from previous mistakes, which means it's not enough to come to the Palestinian president and tell him, change the prime minister and reshuffle the cabinet. He will do it. But the cabinet and the prime minister will continue to report to the president. And he is not going to allow them to function independently. They will always be part of the Palestinian political structure. The main decisions then are taken in the muqata'a. The prime minister is not more than a mayor. The ministers have no political power. They have no authority. I mean, they always need to refer to the president's office in the muqata'a.
It's a one-party system of power.
It's an autocratic power. I mean, it's a one-man show. It's a one-man show called Mahmoud Abbas, and that's why many Palestinians are very skeptical. They're saying, okay, you've replaced the prime minister, you've replaced cabinet ministers, but what kind of reform are you talking about? Palestinians want to see a comprehensive plan. Palestinians want to see an overhaul of the Palestinian Authority. They call the Palestinian Authority an old car that needs a new engine, that needs to go into the garage and come out, after a full overhaul. Is that happening? No. And many Palestinians don't really expect. So what we are seeing right now is the Palestinian Authority leadership, once again, trying to play the Americans and the Europeans for, excuse my expression, for fools.
Absolutely. In fact, the Palestinian public in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria and the areas under the control of the PA by agreement back in 1995 are also very aware of being played for fools. And it's clear, and I think you know this as well as maybe better than anybody, is that there are very, very highly educated, technically capable people in municipal government, in private sector, in utilities and urban planning that are finally saying now, at this particular moment, halas, enough is enough. It's time for us to take our own future into our hands. As strange as this may sound, I know that many of our viewers are perhaps not aware of some of the rumblings going on in the major cities of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, beginning with Ramallah, because they're saying this culture of corruption has been going on for 31 years since a little less, maybe 30 years since the PA was officially established back in the interim course 1995. But they're saying now is the time for an interim technocratic government. The question is, why now? What has October the 7th triggered in the Palestinian-controlled areas in Judea and Samaria as opposed to pre-October 7th?
First of all, then, Palestine, I mean, there's a large number of Palestinians that has always been demanding reform, democracy, good government, transparency, and accountability. And all these demands have, been turned down by the Palestinian Authority leadership. None of them ever materialized. Some of these people who were making these demands found themselves either in prison or in the grave or living in exile. If you criticize President Mahmoud Abbas, you get kicked out of out of the ruling Fatah faction's Central Committee. Ask Mohammed Dahlan, ask Nasser al-Qidwa, the former foreign minister of the Palestinian Authority and a nephew of Yasser Arafat. We are not likely to see the emergence of new leadership or professional independent figures rising to power as long as the Palestinian Authority, which is dominated by Fatah, by the way, is in control. Fatah is not going to give up its power to all these people. They're not going to sit on the side and say, oh, because President Joe Biden wants reform, we are going to hand over the government to someone else. So Fatah and the Palestinian Authority are part of the problem. They are in full control of the Palestinian political system in the West Bank. So these people, the reformists, and they do exist, by the way. We have a number of academics, a number of reformists, people who want change. They're there, but they are afraid to speak out. Because if you speak out and you demand reform and democracy, you will be accused of being a traitor. You will be accused of being on the payroll of the Jewish lobby. You will have no role in the Palestinian political system. And don't forget that there are no elections over there. And the prime minister is appointed by President Abbas, and the ministers are handpicked by President Abbas, and everything goes back to President Abbas and his inner circle. And when I say inner circle, I'm talking about 2 or 3 people in the Palestinian Authority who are sitting with him in the Muqata'a, and the Fatah infrastructure in the West Bank, which is very strong, by the way.
It is very strong. And in fact, without democratic elections that haven't happened almost in 20 years, there's going to be no particular change. And in fact, right now, there is a major deficit of trust between the public, the 1.7 million Palestinians in the Area A of the Judea and Samaria by agreement. How do you rebuild this trust? I mean, that's the fundamental problem. There is absolutely no trust between the PA and the body politic in those areas.
I mean, you are 100% correct. And all public opinion polls show that a majority of the Palestinians believe that the Palestinian Authority is very corrupt. Between 70 to 80% of the Palestinians want President Abbas to resign. And what is worrying is that a majority of Palestinians believe that Hamas is more deserving of leading the Palestinian people. So I'm not sure then the idea of holding elections is a good idea under the current circumstances where Palestinians are going to vote for Hamas once again. So what do? I mean, the only way to bring about real change in the Palestinian Authority is by having those who are funding the Palestinian Authority apply real pressure on the Palestinian Authority to make real changes, comprehensive changes and not cosmetic changes, not musical chairs, where Muhammad goes out and Muhammad Mustafa comes in. This is not real change. And Palestinians are not stupid. They can see through that the Palestinian Authority leadership is not only playing the Americans and the Europeans for fools, they are also deceiving the Palestinian public by pretending that they are embarking on a massive on a massive plan to implement major reforms in the Palestinian Authority. Palestinians have lost confidence in the Palestinian Authority, and this is not new. They lost confidence in the Palestinian Authority under Yasser Arafat, and that's why many Palestinians went to Hamas, and they also lost faith and confidence under Mahmoud Abbas, who for many Palestinians is not much different in his governance style than Yasser Arafat. So the Palestinian Authority remains part of the problem, not part of any solution.
And, the Palestinian public in, the 7 major Palestinian cities in former West Bank of Jordan, we know it as our ancient Judea and Samaria here in Israel, are also aware of what I call the Baruta Bomb, which is the fact that Marwan Barghouti, the infamous Marwan Barghouti, serving 5 life sentences for murder back in the second Intifada, or armed uprising, as it were, in 2000. He's been in prison for over 20 years. And the Americans are talking about pressuring Israel to release him as part of this hostage exchange that the Hamas is basically engineering, and having Marwan Barghouti, who is basically a Hamas affiliate, who is he's not popular if he were out of prison. He's in prison, which makes him a Palestinian hero. You've said this frequently over the last years. That's the definition of heroism on the Palestinian street. And people in the Palestinian areas, in the major Palestinian cities, would say, we cannot countenance the Barghouti bomb. We've got to take our own municipal, civic future in our own hands.
Dan, the problem is that the Americans are always looking for new leaders for the Palestinians. They're looking for new faces, people who will be accepted in the West. Trying to impose leadership on the Palestinians does not work. Can someone please explain to me what is the difference between Marwan Barghouti, Jibril Rajoub, Ismail Haniyeh, and Mahmoud Abbas? What is the difference? I mean, if you release Marwan Barghouti and he becomes the president, what is Marwan Barghouti going to do to advance peace? Is he going to give up the right of return for Palestinian refugees? Is he going to make any compromises on Jerusalem, on the holy sites? Is he going to crack down on on Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank? I'm not sure. So we need to be very careful. Marwan Barghouti, by the way, was the head of the Fatah list that lost the election to Hamas in 2006, the parliamentary election. And although he was in prison, by the way, and as you mentioned, if you're a Palestinian and you're in prison, you're a hero. So can you imagine, here's someone who was in Israeli prison, he ran for the election, and still Hamas won the election. So I don't know, when people say, oh, Marwan Barghouti is the most popular Palestinian leader and he is the Nelson Mandela of the Palestinians, I don't know on what basis they are saying that. Marwan Barghouti is a powerful figure in Fatah. He is respected among his cadres and certain people inside Fatah, not all of Fatah, by the way. So I say, if you really want to know who are the leaders of the Palestinians, hold free and democratic elections. And then you will see what the Palestinians want. Decisions or the appointment of a Palestinian president should not be done by the White House. It should be done at the ballot box by Palestinians.
It seems that the White House is really trying to determine Israeli internal policy as well as Palestinian internal policy right now.
Well, I don't even know what the U.S. administration's policy, by the way, towards the Palestinians is. I mean, we see Blinken, Secretary of State, coming and going. We see a lot of meetings taking place in Ramallah. But, it's always the same statement coming out, from both the Palestinians and the Israelis, from the Palestinians and the Americans. The Americans are, once again, expressing their commitment to the two-state solution. And the Palestinians are saying, yes, we met with the U.S. administration today and we asked them to put pressure on Israel to end the occupation, to stop their measures, to end the war, all these things. There is a feeling that nothing is moving. And this is where the Americans need to stop and reconsider their policy towards the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. Are you going to continue dealing with the same Palestinian Authority leadership that has betrayed the interests of its people, that has lost confidence of a majority of Palestinians, that has repeatedly and consistently lied and misrepresented Palestinian positions to the international community? Or are you going to continue, or are you going to wake up and start, demanding real changes over there? And real changes means changes in the education system, changes in the security forces approach, changes in laws that limit and restrict freedom of speech and freedom of the media, basically ending the totalitarian regime. It's an autocratic regime.
Autocratic.
Yeah.
Authoritarian.
Yeah, authoritarian. What we have in the West Bank is a one-man show called President Mahmoud Abbas. Who are the decision makers in Ramallah? It's President Mahmoud Abbas and 2 or 3 people around him. The most prominent of whom are Hussein al-Sheikh, the PLO Secretary General, and Majid Faraj, the head of the security of the Palestinian intelligence, the general intelligence. These are the 3 decision makers today. There's no functioning parliament. There's no open debate. There's no attempt to share powers with anyone. There's no attempt to consult with other people outside this very small circle of Palestinians sitting there in the Muqata and deciding on behalf of all the Palestinians.
This is where the United States has really gotten it wrong. They've gotten it wrong because they don't take a step back and say, let's try to understand Palestinian political culture. And and let's try to do it with people within the Palestinian political milieu and experts, frankly, like yourself, who've been studying the Palestinian political culture and have family roots into in communities in the West Bank, and people who are really committed and knowledgeable about true democracy. This is what is really stunning to me as an analyst and student of the Middle East, is that the United States, that is one of the great examples of and experiments in democracy, in a federalist system, local power, state power, national power, government of the people by the people, that when it comes to places like the Palestinian Authority, they completely lose their bearings.
Yes, and as you said, I mean, these are questions that need to be addressed to the State Department, to people in the U.S. administration who deal with the Palestinians, and who are always trapped in this conception that, this is how we deal with the Palestinians, this is the policy, and it doesn't change. You deal with the Palestinian Authority leadership with silk gloves. You don't apply too much pressure because they might get angry.
You know what it is? It's a racism of low expectations. I really believe, and I've seen that it comes from a kind of racist position of low expectations. Whereas who are they? Yes. Who are they now pressuring more than ever for? Israel. Yep. A real representative, thriving, vociferous, self-demanding democracy that has all kinds of colors and all kinds of vision. This is a very conservative government, but it was a government elected by the people right now, and the people that are now fighting, men and women fighting to save the lives of Jews. There have been 1,500, 1,800 people that have lost their lives since this jihad that took place on October the 7th, and yet we've seen unprecedented diplomatic and political pressure placed on Israel, which is frankly, I believe, hurting U.S. international interests, especially regional interests in the Middle East. Because if you pressure Israel right now, instead of working from a bottom-up perspective with the Palestinian technical leadership,
you're actually saving Hamas.
You're saving Hamas, empowering Hamas. That's what they're doing, and it is extraordinary to me that they don't see it.
And by saving Hamas, you're not only hurting Israel, you're even hurting the same Palestinian Authority that you are trying to empower and revitalize. So the pressure on Israel to stop the war on Hamas, or to agree to a temporary ceasefire of, I don't even know it's temporary. I mean, we're talking about 40 days, 60 days.
A pause in the fighting.
I mean, I don't see Israel returning to resuming the war after a 40 and 60 days of a pause. It actually means victory for Hamas, by the way. And victory for Hamas is bad not only for Israel, it's bad for the Palestinian Authority, it's bad for Egypt, it's bad for Jordan.
It's bad for the United States.
It's bad, of course.
Because it means if Hamas wins, the Iranian octopus wins.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the problem. So this is where the Americans need to understand that the war on terrorism has to be absolute. It has to go to the end. There is no such thing as, destroying 60 and 70 and 80% of Hamas's military capabilities and leaving 10% or 20%. That hasn't achieved anything. It's only a matter of time before Hamas manages to rebuild its military capabilities over there. And as long as Palestinians, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, see that Hamas is still there, that's victory for Hamas, and their hearts and minds will go to Hamas. Their sympathies will go to Hamas.
That's right. We either out of fear or out of ideology or out of convenience.
Yeah, if I'm living in Gaza, I mean, why should I stand up against Hamas if I see that Hamas is going to remain in power after the war? So you're right. It's either out of fear, or if I'm another, Hamas supporter in Gaza, I would say, wow, this is great. 4 months, and Israel hasn't been able to achieve its goal of removing Hamas from power. So these Hamas people are heroes.
Absolutely clear. And where I think the United States could really get on the page is to understand, as we've been saying, that the source of this problem is the Iranian octopus in Tehran. It is not Gaza per se. It is not Hezbollah in Lebanon per se. It is not Syria per se. Those are tentacles of the Iranian octopus. And as long as Israel is forced to keep cutting off tentacles without going to the head of the problem with the United States, the problem is going to exist. And it's like a hydra. And a hydra grows its arms, it grows its tentacles back. And that is exactly the situation that we are in. So Israel has a responsibility to straighten out a misunderstanding that even Israel had created and bought into for years. And that is, they thought that they were in a territorial conflict back in the early 90s, that if you could solve the territorial conflict between Israel and Israel's Palestinian neighbors, the rest of the Middle East would come into order and enjoy security, stability, and prosperity. That is not the case.
Yeah. Again, I have to keep repeating this and reminding people that this conflict is not about a settlement. It's not about borders. It's not about refugees. It's not about Jerusalem. It's not about checkpoints, and it's not about, electricity and water. This conflict is really about Israel's presence in the Middle East. And as we see from public opinion polls, especially among the Palestinians, there is still a majority of people that has not come to terms with Israel's right to exist, and they see Israel as one big settlement that needs to be uprooted from here.
Right.
That is the essence of this whole problem.
That's right. That's why they call Israel settler, and the West buys into this nonsense. They call it, settler colonial violence or settler violence. Every time the United States government uses that term, they undermine themselves, because from a Palestinian point of view, a person in Jaffa, in Tel Aviv, in Ramat HaSharon, up in the north, in Kiryat Shmona, is a settler. The person in the Negev is a settler.
That's how they describe them in the Palestinian media, whether it's the Palestinian Authority or the Hamas media. The Palestinian Authority, by the way, if you follow their media, radio and TV and newspapers, you will see that they refer to Arabs living inside Israel as living in the 1948 occupied territories, which means that they do not distinguish between the occupied city of Nazareth and the occupied city of Ramallah.
That's right.
It's all one occupation. Israel is one big settlement. A Jew is a settler, whether he lives in Ma'ale Adumim, Efrat, or in Tel Aviv, or in Ramat Gan, or in Holon, or in Tiberias. These are all settlers. And this is how the Palestinian media, this is a Palestinian narrative, by the way, to depict all these Jews as settlers, as colonialists, as people, as strangers who came to this land, as people who were dumped here after World War II in compensation for the Holocaust. They took a land that does not belong to them. They have no history over here. They have no legitimacy. They have no rights. They have no roots, and they should just leave.
That's one of the major issues of an incoming interim government also, which sometimes we discuss with our Palestinian colleagues who are in their late 20s, early 30s, and basically would find a seat around this table as to say, no, we want change. And my question to you as we have the last couple of minutes of our episode here is that possible to have that discussion for technocratic, young, highly educated people to say, well, wait a second, you know what? There is we need to recognize the Jews have been here for 3,700 years. We're talking about sharing the land, but the Jews have very, very deep roots in this part of the world, and we have to stop this type of dehumanization, delegitimization, and then we can really start as trusted partners.
Then people like that do exist, by the way, but they're afraid to speak out. And I don't blame them. If you're living under the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank or under Hamas in Gaza, you're afraid to speak out. I mean, can you find me one Palestinian who will agree to stand up in Ramallah and say that Jews have historical religious rights over here? On the contrary, there's a total denial of any Jewish link to this land. And the same applies to Gaza. If you're not arrested or shot by Palestinian security forces or Hamas security forces, there are always people who will target, the masked man will target you, and no one knows who's hiding behind this mask, by the way. And this is a tragedy of the Palestinians, that they always allow themselves to be intimidated by a tiny minority of thugs and terrorists, and people are afraid to speak out. So you're not going to see the emergence of new leadership, more pragmatic, moderate people, as long as the Palestinians are controlled by two bad governments that are separately suppressing the emergence of new leadership through oppressive measures.
So the real question as we wind up is the challenge to the Palestinian people: can they take themselves from tragedy to triumph? The responsibility is in their hands to move from what they call to victimhood to become not victims, but to become the champions of their own future from the ground up.
What is needed is a Palestinian spring. Palestinians who will rise against their leaders, whether it's Hamas or the PLO, doesn't matter. Palestinians need not only a Palestinian Spring, they need a Palestinian Intifada, an Intifada that is directed against Palestinian leaders who have deprived them of the international aid, who have led them from one disaster to another, who keep radicalizing them on a daily basis, who never offer them any hope. And look at the situation of the Palestinians, whether it's in the West Bank or in Gaza. It's catastrophic. And that's why it's time for Palestinians to rise up and say enough is enough.
Demanding from themselves enough.
Absolutely. Enough is enough from their leaders who have brought disaster after disaster on themselves.
I think you said it the best. And thank you, Khaled Abu-Toameh, dear friend and colleague for so many decades of giving us deep insight into the challenges of building Palestinian society from the ground up. And perhaps we can move from tragedy to triumph for all the peoples of the Middle East. This has been Al-Shaq Al-Awsat Lana, and that's why it is our Middle East, and that's a great way, I think, of looking at the Palestinians from the outside in, not from the inside out, so they can join the community of nations of the Middle East that is going through a fundamental shift. And we have to wait and see whether in the post-October 7th, whether moderation can triumph over extremism.
Yeah. Inshallah.
Inshallah. God willing. Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you then.